topic I think we need to have a conversation about. And so I have author Annie Jacobsen on, and we're going to talk about in nuclear war. Annie, thanks for stopping by. And I wanted to kind of jump first into specifically enough and talk about, some of the books you've written before this.
So I'm a national security reporter, an investigative journalist. I write about war and weapons, national security and secrets. Can't tell you how many sources in every one of my books, because I write about the CIA and the Pentagon, operations, all the different wars we fought, including from World War II forward. Imagine how many of them have said to me with kind of a swelling chest pride that what they did was to prevent nuclear World War III.
Ah,
And so this,
sometimes this total war will make
yeah,
sure that nuclear war will not happen. Because
absolutely.
I remember growing up in the 80s. I'm 51, and all of we were worried about the Russians attacking us in a full nuclear attack. That's always what we talked about in specific ways during the whole Cold War. So I see.
Absolutely. And we're the same age. And so we have that memory. And that inspired me to, become a reporter. And I've interviewed all these different individuals who fought in these different wars, always with this idea that they were preventing the spread of communism. Soviet Russia was the big bad, preventing nuclear World War III. And this book came out of that, of saying, well, what happened if it's not prevented? This big idea that sits behind nuclear war is this psychological phenomenon and the Defense Department's policy called deterrence. It's a synonym for prevention. And it promises that nuclear war will not happen. And the question is, but what if it does?
And we'll get to that in a second. Because we have a little bit more time, and that's pretty cool that you jumped on early. And I'm on my live audience this morning as I wake up early. Not usually, I'm up at 7. I'm a little late, and I know you're in California. But let's kind of talk about specifically enough. I think that when we look at trying to prevent this, when you look at war, there's a lot of reasons for war. There's not just a reason to protect people. There's always a financial reason or other backdoor reason there's war, right? In a lot of ways in the history of our world.
I mean, no doubt we could discuss war and never end, because man, for whatever reason, tends toward warring. I like reading the oldest forms of war by looking at anthropologists and archaeologists who write about and study, the origin of war, and wonder what that is. Is it hunter-gatherer? Did we start off trying to kill the wildebeest or one another? And so it's a very interesting hypothetical to think about.
Oh, absolutely. Okay. So what if there is a nuclear war? That scares me. Because I think that's the biggest thing is if Russia and the United States went after it in China and we all just started war games is the first thing that comes up every time I think of a full nuclear war is war games. And imagine that. What do you do if it's total annihilation, right? There's nothing left after this, right? If we start sending nuclear bombs left and right, back and forth from the major places.
There's a moment for every journalist, I think, when you're writing a book where you realize, oh my God, that's the central quote, right? And for me, it was this. It came from the former Stratcom commander, General Keeler. And for those who might not be familiar with Stratcom, the US has 11 combatant commands. You've heard of SOCOM and, Northcom. Okay, Stratcom is in charge of the nuclear weapons. So in the event of a counter launch, the president talks to the Stratcom commander. There's no one in between them. And the Stratcom commander told me when we were discussing a nuclear exchange between Russia and the United States, he said, Annie, the world could end in the next few hours.
Right. Do you remember War Games and Barry Corbin, who's on my show? Can you believe he was on my show a couple of months ago? Was ready to order to the president to say to go ahead and do the whole onslaught attack. That gave a good depiction. When you agree, War Games in a way of what could happen if an attack from Russia came from everywhere. There's other movies as well in the 80s that did that.
Absolutely. War Games and also The Day After. And not much has changed. The arsenals have gotten a little bit smaller. since those days. But there are more nuclear armed nations now than there were when you and I were watching those shows as high schoolers in the 80s. And so the threat has only ratcheted up, which is why I believe so many of these high ranking officials went on the record with me to, sort of alert the public that this existential threat, not only has it not gone away, but there are very serious arguments of why we're at an even more perilous moment than we were in the 1980s. And education, by the way, is key. People being aware of all of this is key because nuclear threats are really, really, really dangerous.
Totally, because you pretty much think about the dirty bombs in the in Desert Storm and how bad they were, and those were just dirty bombs, not nuclear bombs. And imagine like it just hits. Let's just say it wasn't a full onslaught attack. Somebody decided to hit California, right? And what would affect the rest of the United States from that attack just in California, right?
Well, let's also clarify because whatever bombs you're talking about in Iraq, they were never nuclear. So there has never been a
No, dirty
nuclear.
bombs. No, not nuclear. They were like um during Desert Storm, they were more, what would you say?
Well,
Like
they're bombs, kinetic bombs, nuclear bombs. So, just only to say that because it is a line and it is a line that must never be crossed because as I demonstrate in the book, once a nuclear weapon is used, and I'm not talking about a dirty bomb, which would be a terrorist getting their hands on a device that's essentially a radiological device, kind of you need a triggering mechanism to be able to detonate a nuclear weapon. And as far as the CIA knows, and as far as I know, so far, terrorists have never gotten a hold of a triggering device. They may have gotten hold of some nuclear materials, but a triggering device is what allows a weapon to explode.
oh, okay. Okay.
But not to be corrective, just because, these things are so critical. As I write in the nuclear war scenario, my new book, the strategic weapons that are involved, those are intercontinental ballistic missiles. So they're ballistic missiles that go from one continent to the next in essentially 30 minutes. And so once an ICBM is launched, it cannot be redirected or recalled. And so, as you remember from war games, once it begins, there is a system in place that I delineate from my sources that also cannot be undone. And things escalate very quickly, which is why when General Keeler said the world could end in the next couple of hours, he was being very, very serious.
Oh, jeez. Okay, so you say we're closer than this than ever from your research and what you write this book.
So, I mean, here's the problem. And let me quote the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres, since he, coming from him, this is pretty powerful. He said recently, we are one miscalculation, one misunderstanding away from nuclear annihilation.
Oh.
Those are his words.
Mm.
And he described us, living at the razor's edge and that this is madness. And I think the point of my book is to actually demonstrate in appalling detail. Appalling detail. I mean, I describe what happens to a human being in a nuclear blast. And this, by the way, is sourced from Defense Department documents because they've been studying it
Oh my
since
God.
Hiroshima. And I want to show the readers how horrific it is because let's go back for one moment of hopeful before we just terrify all of your listeners and they run in the other direction.
And viewers, yes, yes,
Okay.
got it.
And viewers, right? So go back to the 80s when we were in high school. There was a ABC mini or ABC television movie called The Day After.
Okay.
Remember that?
I never
And
saw that one. No. Okay.
so it showed a nuclear war between Soviet Russia and America. And 100 million Americans watched it. It was terrifying.
That might have been what I watched when I was in eighth grade, sixth, fourth or fifth grade. Is that that might
Yes,
be the one that,
1980, 1983.
okay, so that I'm trying to, yeah, I was 10.
Yep.
Yes.
So, and go back and watch it because what happened is actually a hopeful moment in history. President Reagan was a nuclear hawk at that point. He believed that more nuclear weapons made us safer. His axis of evil speech had just happened. He watched the day after, against the wishes of his White House chief of staff, by the way. He watched the day after, and he wrote in his White House journal he became greatly depressed. And as a result, he reached out to the so-called enemy, Russia, and started perceiving them as an adversary, as an opponent. And as a result, reaching out to Gorbachev. Reagan and Gorbachev had the summit, and they reduced the arsenals, the nuclear arsenals, from, are you ready for this? 70,000 nuclear weapons. 70,000 was
Wow.
the all-time high in 1986. And now we have 12,500. So think about that as progress.
Yes. How much money is made by creating a nuclear weapon? Who makes the money? Manufacturers? Yeah.
I mean, it's an extraordinary system of systems that trillions of dollars have been spent. Not only are there nuclear weapons, we have a nuclear triad. We have ICBMs. We have 400 ICBMs in the silos in the ground. We have 14 nuclear-armed, nuclear-powered submarines, each with 20 missile tubes for sub-launched ballistic missiles, each with MIRV warheads. Each submarine could destroy a nation. Okay,
I,
then we
I
have 66 nuclear bombers.
and that's the concern that you look at with our national security today, whoever's political side you're on, because there are people that just want full, hopefully, because of social media, because it's not like the days of, if we go in history, where they really did, certain civilizations said, oh, yeah, we're going to just take over all of it and become the world power in history, that they know that maybe they're looking at wealth versus total annihilation because they know they'll be annihilated as well. Hopefully, most of the world leaders understand. They don't look at, okay, if I launch an attack, I'm going to die too. There's no safety unless they come up with an underground city they create, or this happens in 20 years and everyone goes to space, which is science fiction completely. But yes, having hotel, colonization on the moon and colonization on Mars at one point in time, this could happen in 40 years, a total annihilation, and people leave. I don't know. I'm just giving you some certain scenarios that could potentially happen in history someday.
Well, what you're making me think of is the paradox of deterrence, which is this idea that the Defense Department has, deterrence being a synonym for prevention. When you ask about money and you ask about options, this system has been in place. The idea that we will have a bunch of nuclear weapons pointed at everybody and they will have them pointed at us, and no one would be crazy enough to launch nuclear weapons. So then we'll be safe. And that idea has held, indeed, for decades. But the question is, will it continue to hold? And if it doesn't hold, it all unravels. And that unraveling is what I describe in nuclear war scenario.
And I think Putin's all about making money at the end of the day, and power versus letting his civilization die too. So I wouldn't be as concerned, but somebody like that looks at, religious reasons to launch a nuclear attack. What will our response be if it was just a couple bombs, right? What are we going to go and just annihilate? Let's say it was the Middle East. What That's the questions that your book is going to answer. And people can go ahead and purchase your book. Where's the best place?
Bookstores everywhere.
And is there more? Do you see this could go into? Is this deeper? This project that you're going to go with, because it seems like you put so much time into it. Yeah.
I took the reader from nuclear launch to nuclear winter. And so there's a lot we haven't discussed that is, nail biting, terrifying, I believe, all sourced again from the experts who deal with these subjects. But the idea that at the end of the nuclear exchange, the soot that gets lofted into the air blots out the sun, agriculture fails, and man returns to his hunter-gatherer selves. That's a long, you ask about, future projects. That's a lot to think about for a very long time.
No doubt. But we have to look at, if somehow something did happen, will we move? How long till we have colonization in space? That's what we're waiting on.
Well, I think that I mean, in terms of the book, Nuclear War Scenario, I think the message is let's not have a nuclear war.
Right. I
Because
agree.
if you have a nuclear war, there will be no technology left, because there will be, I mean, I really encourage you to read the book, and, you know, we can do a follow-up Zoom about how it feels after having read the book and what you think about colonization then. Because the takeaway is, my God, under no circumstances can we ever have a nuclear war. And why isn't this a bigger issue, be it at the presidential level or at the local level, where people like you and I experienced in the 80s are saying, this is madness and something has to change.
All right. Thanks again, Annie. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
You're listening and watching The Neil Haley Show, and we'll be back in just a moment.